As always, I encourage you either to follow along with your book or open up the PDF or to make the screen larger so that your eyes can follow the words with me. I hope that part of the reading is that you are improving your part of the reading of the book is that you are improving your own personal reading skills. But I also hope that you are appreciating the story that we are working with. It is sad, it's heartbreaking, um, which I suppose is a great transition to this idea of what is the book called and why would Elie Wiesel call it that? Um, so let us read. As we think about the title, think about what that word means and what might be going on. So without further ado, let us press on into chapter 7. We're just going to do chapter 7 today. Pressed tightly against one another, in an effort to resist the cold, our heads empty and heavy, our brains a whirlwind of decaying memories, our minds numb with indifference. Here or elsewhere, what did it matter? Die today or tomorrow or later? The night was growing longer, never ending. When at last a grayish light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk deeply between the shoulders, crouching, piled one on top of the other, like a cemetery covered with snow. In the early dawn light, I tried to distinguish between the living and those who were no more, but there was barely any difference. My gaze remained fixed on someone who, eyes wide open, stared into space. His colorless face was covered with a layer of frost and snow. My father had huddled near me, draped in his blanket, shoulders laden with snow. And what if he were dead as well? I called out to him. No response. I would have screamed if I could. He was not moving. Suddenly, the evidence overwhelmed me. There was no longer any reason to live, any reason to fight. The train stopped in an empty field. The abrupt halt had wakened a few sleepers. They stood looking around, startled. Outside, the SS walked by, shouting, "Throw out all the dead! Outside! All the corpses!" The living were glad. They would have more room. Volunteers began the task. They touched those who had remained on the ground. "Here's one! Take him!" The volunteers undressed him and eagerly shared his garments. Then two gravediggers grabbed him by the head and feet and threw him from the wagon like a sack of flour. There was shouting all around. "Come on! Here's another! My neighbor, he's not moving!" I woke from my apathy only when two men approached my father. I threw myself on his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, "Father, Father, wake up! They're going to throw you outside!" His body remained inert. The two gravediggers had grabbed me by the neck. "Leave him alone! Can't you see he's dead?" "No!" I yelled. "He's not dead! Not yet!" And I started to hit him harder and harder. At last, my father half opened his eyes. They were glassy. He was breathing faintly. "You see!" I cried. The two men went away. 20 corpses were thrown from our wagon. Then the train resumed its journey, leaving in its wake, in a snowy field in Poland, hundreds of naked orphans without a tomb. We received no food. We lived on snow. It took place of bread. The days resembled the nights, and the nights left in our souls the dregs of their darkness. The train rolled slowly, often halted for a few hours and continued. It never stopped snowing. We remained lying on the floor for days and nights, one on top of the other, never uttering a word. We were nothing but frozen bodies, our eyes closed. We merely waited for the next stop, to unload our dead. There followed days and nights of traveling. Occasionally, we would pass through German towns, usually very early in the morning. German laborers were going to work. They would stop and look at us without surprise. One day, when we had come to a stop, a worker took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into the wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought desperately over a few crumbs. The worker watched the spectacle with great interest. Years later, I witnessed a similar spectacle in Aden. Our ship's passengers amused themselves by throwing coins to the natives who dove to retrieve them. An elegant Parisian lady took great pleasure in this game. When I noticed two children desperately fighting in the water, one trying to strangle the other, I implored the lady, please, don't throw any more coins. Why not? She said. I like to give to charity. In the wagon, where the bread had landed, a battle had ensued. Men were hurling themselves against each other, trampling, tearing at, and mauling each other. Beasts of prey unleashed animal hate in their eyes. An extraordinary vitality possessed them, sharpening their teeth and nails. A crowd of workmen and curious passer-by had formed all along the train. They had undoubtedly never seen a train with this kind of cargo. Soon pieces of bread were falling into the wagon from the sides, and the spectators observed these emaciated creatures ready to kill for a crust of bread. A piece fell into our wagon. I decided not to move. Anyway, I knew that I would not be strong enough to fight off dozens of violent men. I saw, not far from me, an old man dragging himself on all fours. He had just detached himself from the struggling mob. He was holding one hand to his heart. At first, I thought he had received a blow to his chest. Then I understood. He was hiding a piece of bread under his shirt. With lightning speed, he pulled it out and put it to his mouth. His eyes lit up. A smile, like a grimace, illuminated his ashen face, and was immediately extinguished. A shadow had lain down beside him, and the shadow threw itself over him. Stunned by the blows, the old man was crying, Mar, my little Mar, don't you recognize me? You're killing your father. I have bread for you too, for you too. He collapsed, but his fist was still clutching a small crust. He wanted to raise it to his mouth, but the other threw himself on him. The old man mumbled something, groaned, and died. Nobody cared. His son searched him, took the crust of bread, and began to devour it. He didn't get far. Two men had been watching. They jumped him. Others joined in. When they withdrew, there were two dead bodies next to me, the father and the son. I was 16. In our wagon, there was a friend of my father's, Meyer Katz. He had worked as a gardener in Buna and from time to time had brought us some green vegetables. Less undernourished than the rest of us, detention had been easier on him. Because he was stronger than most of us, he had been put in charge of our wagon. On the third night of our journey, I woke up with a start when I felt two hands on my throat, trying to strangle me. I barely had time to call, Father! Just that one word. I was suffocating. But my father had awakened and grabbed my aggressor. Too weak to overwhelm him, he thought of calling Meyer Katz. Come quickly! Someone is strangling my son! In a few moments, I was freed. I never did find out why the stranger had wanted to strangle me. But days later, Meyer Katz told my father, Shlomo, I'm getting weak. My strength is gone. I won't make it. Don't give in, my father tried to encourage him. You must resist. Don't lose faith in yourself. But Meyer Katz only groaned in response. I can't go on, Shlomo. I can't help it. I can't go on. My father took his arm, and Meyer Katz, the strong one, the sturdiest of us all, began to cry. His son had been taken from him during the first selection, but only now was he crying for him. Only now did he fall apart. He could not go on. He had reached the end. On the last day of our journey, a terrible wind began to blow, and the snow kept falling. We sensed that the end was near, the real end. We could not hold out long in this glacial wind, this storm. Somebody got up and yelled, We must remain strong! We shall freeze to death! Let's get up and move! We all got up. We all pulled our soaked blankets tighter around our shoulders, and we tried to take a few steps, to shuffle back and forth in place. Suddenly a cry rose in the wagon, a cry of a wounded animal. Someone had just died. Others, close to death, imitated his cry. And the cry seemed to come from beyond the grave. Soon everybody was crying, groaning, moaning, cries of distress hurled into the wind and the snow. The lament spread from wagon to wagon. It was contagious. And now hundreds of cries rose at once. The death rattle of an entire convoy with the end approaching. All boundaries had been crossed. Nobody had any strength left. And the night seemed endless. Meyer Katz was moaning. Why don't they just shoot us now? That same night, we reached our destination. It was late. The guards came to unload us. The dead were left in the wagons. Only those who could stand could leave. Meyer Katz remained on the train. The last day had been the most lethal. We had been 100 or so in this wagon. 12 of us left it. Among them, my father and myself. We had arrived in Buchenwald. The book is titled Night. So when you think of night, what ideas do you have? What comes to mind? Often we think of dark, nighttime. We might think of, scary animal noises that we don't quite understand. Maybe a little bit of, that scary kind of unknown. When you can't see things, it's hard to imagine good things. We tend to think of bad things, monsters under our bed. Night, darkness. The night was long and never ending. Well, of course, the actual night ended. The day is still only 24 hours, but it can work metaphorically here. Darkness, dreariness, desperation, fear, and how this idea of that darkness continuing and seeming to never end. All right, father-son relationship. He thinks his dad is dead, and he says there's no more reason to live, no more reason to struggle. With my father gone, I have nothing left. So it was truly, truly something so important to Ellie, and that the two of them really did work to keep each other alive through all of this. Think of your own family relationships. I hope that you are able to depend on your family just as much as Ellie depends on his father. I hope that you have good relationships like that. I hope you never go through anything like this. But I think the point is that relationship was critical to helping him survive. So we get the word apathy in here. It means he don't care. He says he awoke from his apathy. They're about ready to take his father and throw him off the train because they assumed he was dead. And he's just kind of sitting there like watching all this. No. And that's when he realizes it's his father and he kind of moves to action. All right, once again, we get this idea of nights. The nights left the dregs of their darkness in our souls. So we specifically get darkness called out here, and how that darkness doesn't just color the night sky, but it poisons their souls. And everything is dark, and everything is terrifying. And the night never ends. And so there's a darkness in their souls that never end. Sorry. All right, this passage here is just extremely powerful. Let me move my hair. We get another one of these phrases, some years later. So once again, we're here kind of towards the end, and I did move the arrow before it was over here, but we moved the arrow because we're close to the end of the book, and he's jumping forward. He's going beyond the end of the story, right, and jumping into his future here. And I just want to pull the passage up so that I'm not doing it. So they're on the train, and some people who are off the train, just standing by the train tracks watching. It says they're Germans. They take bread and they throw it up and over the wall of the train so that it falls down into where the men are. And it says dozens of starving men fought each other to the death for a few crumbs. It's terrible. And then he says, some years later, so after the war ended, Ellie was able to live freely, and he went on a vacation. I'm assuming it's vacation here. Went on a trip, whatever it was. And he sees this woman throwing coins to these little kids, right? And the kids are fighting over it. And he says, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And then she says, I like to give to charity. So here's the thing. This event in the concentration camp reminds him, well, actually, the event here in the future reminds him of the concentration camp, but they are connected. So we as critical readers have to figure out, how are they connected? So let's take a look here. Piece of bread, threw it into the wagon, dozens of men fighting each other. Same kind of scene. Throwing coins, two children engaged in a death struggle. So we have people killing each other for bread, children killing each other for coins. And the woman says, I like to give to charity. Why is that so disgusting, so horrible? Is she truly being generous with her money? Why is this such a terrible thing? Well, it reminds him of this experience where if she wanted to truly give to charity, she would hand each child a coin or perhaps some food or some clothes or something. But it becomes entertainment. I'll throw this coin out and I will watch these children fight. If these Germans cared about the Jews, which they probably didn't, if they cared, they wouldn't be throwing little pieces of crust of bread over, right? And watching them fight. Because it says that they watched them fight. Wild beasts of prey, right? Tearing at each other, teeth and nails. The spectators were watching. They'd probably never seen anything like this, right? And yet they're continuing it. So this is not charity. This is actually pure evil. To throw a coin to a child and watch the child fight, to throw some bread to starving men and watch them kill each other over the bread, there's no charity in that. It's vile, evil, despicable behavior. All right, we get another contrasting father-son relationship where this man who was able to get a piece of bread and he's hiding it, and his son comes over and his son beats on him and kills him until the son takes the bread. You're killing your father. His son searched him, took the bread, ate it. The son kills the father. How different is that? Ellie, start of the chapter, says there is no reason to live because my father is dead. And here we have a son killing his father over food. So very different perspectives of that pattern that we've been seeing. All right, for some reason the PDF says he was 16. My version here says he was 15. I think still the point remains the same. I can only guess that in the updated version or the PDF translation, some of the dates kind of got fixed over history. Maybe Ellie's memory came a little more clear as time passed from one printing to the next. But the point is this: why should this shock you personally? Why should this freak you out? Because you are 14 or 15 or 16 and you're sitting in your house, and in a minute you're probably going to get out your iPhone, and then you're going to turn on your PlayStation, or you're going to watch YouTube, and you're going to walk into the kitchen and get a big old bucket of cheese balls. And that's not bad. You have your lives, and no one blames you for that. But think about what he went through by the time he was your age. Think of the horrors of this book. How traumatic that would be to have to live with that his entire life. He wasn't some 50, 60, 70-year-old man. He was 15 when he did this. 15 when he went through this. I hope nothing like that ever happens to you. All right, and then we end at Buchenwald. And so I got some pictures here of what that might have looked like. Again, I don't know if these are all exactly from the Buchenwald Holocaust concentration camp, but you can see, once again, how thin they are, how few clothes they're wearing, barbed wire fencing, the lining up and forming ranks. It looks like these men are holding this guy up, maybe because he's so weak. Looks like they're kind of holding him up there. So, pretty terrible. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will talk to you later. Bye now.